I don't remember what day it is. Not by the calendar, at least. I measure time now by the sound of the mail slot clattering and the dull hum of the fridge kicking on. Some days I forget to eat. Other days I eat crackers out of the box in breadcrumbs stuck to my elbows. The curtains in the living room haven't moved since the funeral. I tied them back the day before, thinking the light might help. It didn't. So I let them fall again, heavy and still. The sun doesn't belong in this house anymore, not without Hank. The phone rings. I think about letting it go like I usually do. But it's the short ring cell phone, not the landline. Ivy. I answer on the fourth ring. Hi. I'm coming by Saturday, she says, bright as ever. I've got something for you. No need, honey. I start, but the call ends before I finish. Just like her mother, always moving forward, never waiting for permission. I stay in bed the rest of the day. I don't change the sheets. I don't brush my teeth. When my daughter calls in the evening, I let it go to voicemail. She'll just ask if I've eaten, and I'll lie again. I've gotten good at sounding okay when I'm not. On Friday, I think about cleaning, just enough to not be embarrassed. But the thought of wiping down the counters feels like betrayal. His fingerprints used to be there. His coffee mug ring still stains the side table. If I erase those, what's left? Saturday morning comes quiet and cold. I sit on the edge of the couch in the dark, wrapped in the robe he bought me years ago. The doorbell rings 2 quick chimes. I almost don't get up, but I do. I open the door. Ivy stands there smiling, cheeks pink from the wind, and in her arms, a small cardboard box that moves. She walked in without asking. I hadn't swept the floor, hadn't picked up the laundry that's been in the chair for a week. Ivy didn't mention any of it. She just stepped inside soft steps on the old wood and placed the box on the kitchen table like it was something sacred. The box moved. I froze. It shifted again, a light scraping from inside. Then the sound, a tiny, raw meow, almost too soft to believe. What is that? I asked, already knowing. She's for you, Ivy said. Her face was calm. Not smug, not teasing. Just gentle, like this had always been the plan. I moved closer against my better judgment. The flaps of the box weren't taped shut, just folded over. I lifted one with the tip of a finger and looked in. A kitten. Small, frail, gray and white. Its fur was patchy in places, ears too big for its face. But those eyes so wide they looked painted on. Eyes like it was trying to understand the whole world at once. Eyes that locked onto mine without blinking. I let the flap drop. Ivy, I don't need something to take care of, I said, stepping back. She didn't flinch. No, she said. She needs you. I laughed once dry. Then take her back. I can't, she said, and kissed my cheek before leaving. The door closed behind her, like a breath being held. The kitten meowed again, louder this time. I sat in the next room, pretending not to listen, but the sound kept coming soft and stubborn. It wasn't crying. It was calling. An hour passed, then another. I didn't move. When I finally looked toward the box again, the flap had fallen open. A small paw dangled out over the edge, twitching, not scratching, just there. I didn't touch it, didn't speak, but I didn't tell it to go either. I told myself not to look, just let it be. If it was hungry enough, it would quiet down eventually. But by late afternoon, the sound had changed, less mewling, more pleading. Soft, hoarse, almost like it was running out of strength. I shuffled into the kitchen, not because I cared, but because the noise was getting under my skin. I found an old can of tuna in the back of the pantry. No fancy cat food. Just this. I peeled it open, drained it over the sink, then dropped the fish into a saucer and set it near the heater vent. This doesn't mean anything, I said aloud, mostly to myself. It didn't hesitate. Not even a second. The kitten dove into the food like it hadn't eaten in days. Maybe it hadn't. I watched for a moment, then turned away before I could feel anything about it. That night, I went to bed early. It was too cold to sit in the living room. I left the door open, not thinking much of it. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was a small lump of fur at the foot of my bed. Not on the covers inside them, curled against the back of my calf. I didn't move, just stared at it for a long time. I got up slowly, careful not to wake it. The floor creaked under me as I walked down the hall. I hadn't stepped into the sunroom in weeks, but I went there now, searching the cedar chest for a blanket. Something soft. I found the one Hank used when he napped. I shook it out, brought it back, and laid it at the foot of the bed before the kitten even stirred. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened the window, just a crack. A breeze moved through the room. Light caught the dust in midair, and for a moment I just watched it. My hand reached into it steady. Behind me, I heard a soft rustle as the kitten stretched and yawned. I kept telling myself not to get used to it, not to encourage anything. A kitten was temporary, a disruption something Ivy would eventually tire of and reclaim. So I didn't give it a name. Names meant roots. Names meant permanence. But I still found myself talking to it. "Stop scratching," that I said, when it attacked the leg of the couch. "You're not allowed on that chair," I muttered, when it balanced on the arm like a tightrope walker. It blinked at me each time, slow and unbothered, as if every rule I set was merely a suggestion it would consider later. I told myself I was only keeping it alive, nothing more. Yet there I was in the kitchen, lifting each tiny paw and wiping it clean with a towel after it stepped in its water dish. It didn't protest. It just watched me with that calm, trusting stare that made something uncomfortable twist inside my chest. The vet's number was still stuck to the fridge from years ago. I called without thinking. When the receptionist asked for the pet's name, I hesitated, then said, "Just put kitten for now." An appointment was booked. I hung up before I could question why I'd done it. Later, while washing its food dish in the sink, I caught myself humming. Not a tune I recognized, just a sound, something light that didn't belong in a house that had been silent for so long. I stopped immediately. The dish slipped a little in my hands. When Ivy called that afternoon, I told her the kitten just exists, nothing more. She laughed softly, like she knew something I didn't want to admit. The next morning, I heard a thump in the living room, followed by a frantic scrabble of claws. The kitten had misjudged the distance between a shelf and the ottoman, tumbling straight into my lap, where I sat reading the paper. "You're clumsy, Pip," I whispered, without thinking, my hand already stroking its back. I froze. The kitten purred. I didn't name it. I muttered to no one as the little body curled deeper into the blanket across my knees, ready for whatever came next. I used to avoid the hallway entirely. Too many shadows, too many memories piled up like old coats no one wants to wear anymore. But now, I find myself walking back and forth, mostly to chase Pip down from places she has no business being. The top of the fridge, the windowsill behind the curtains, once even the kitchen counter where she stared at the faucet like it might sing. The pantry door had been sticking for months. I just lived with it, letting it groan and resist until I gave up. But one morning, Pip pawed at it, trying to get to the broom leaning behind it. I grabbed a screwdriver without thinking. 30 minutes later, the hinges didn't squeal anymore. I didn't tell anyone I fixed it. There wasn't anyone to tell. Later that week, I stepped out onto the porch for the first time in who knows how long. I had to move a bag of old newspapers out of the way. The weeds had taken over between the boards, sprouting up through cracks like small rebellions. I got the shears from the shed and trimmed them back. Nothing fancy, just less wild. When Ivy stopped by again, she blinked at my shoes before hugging me. "You're wearing real ones?" she said, nudging my foot gently with hers. I had to go out back, I replied. Pip chased something into the bushes. She smiled. It smells better in here. I shrugged. It's the kitten. Less mess than I expected. But that night after she'd gone, I sat in the kitchen and noticed it myself, the faint scent of fabric softener from the blanket I'd washed earlier, mixed with warm floorboards and air that had finally started to move again. It wasn't perfume or candles or flowers. It was just clean, alive. I left the window cracked open on purpose before bed. The wind crept in and lifted the edge of the curtain. Pip curled against my hip like a weight I hadn't realized I missed. She stayed there as I closed my eyes, breathing in something that didn't feel like dust. The wind started howling just after sunset. It came in hard, pushing against the windows like it wanted inside. The lights flickered once then again, then nothing, just the hum of silence and the soft whimpering sound from under the table. Pip was hidden deep beneath it, pressed flat against the leg, her eyes wide and wet. Thunder cracked hard overhead, and she let out a low, trembling cry. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and got down on my knees joints, protesting, as I lowered myself to the floor. "It's all right," I whispered, inching closer. "I've got you." She didn't move at first, but when I stretched out my hand and tapped the beam of light gently beside her, she crawled toward me. I scooped her up, held her to my chest, and stayed there on the floor, her heartbeat fluttering fast beneath my fingers. The power didn't come back for hours, but I didn't move. I just sat there, a blanket wrapped around both of us, listening to the storm rage and fade. My heart didn't race from fear. It thudded steady with something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. A need to protect. A reason to stay present. By morning, the sky had cleared and the power returned. Pip was fast asleep at the foot of my bed, again, legs stretched out like she owned the place. I padded into the kitchen and reached for the oatmeal. I made 2 bowls. One thick one, mostly milk. I set the second one on a saucer near her spot by the heater and chuckled to myself. It came out sharp, rusty, but real. The kind of sound I'd forgotten how to make. The mail came late, as usual. Among the flyers and bills was a letter from the benefits office, a reminder about Hank's file. A note about final paperwork numbers, signatures. I put it on the counter. I'd deal with it eventually, but not today. Today, Pip was already scratching at the back door, impatient to feel the sun on her fur. And I wasn't going to let her out there alone. The doctor glanced up from her notes and tilted her head. "You're walking steadier." I shifted on the exam table, adjusting my sleeves. "I have a cat now," I said. She smiled politely, probably used to stranger explanations. But she didn't press. I didn't offer more. After the appointment, I drove by the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the funeral. Not once. I told myself I didn't need to go to a slab of stone to remember Hank. He was in the creak of the stairs in the mug that still sat on the second shelf in the songs I couldn't listen to anymore. But something pulled me there that morning. I brought Pip's picture with me, one Ivy had printed from her phone. The kitten stretched out on the windowsill, blinking into the light like it belonged there. I slipped it under a smooth stone at the edge of the headstone, tucking it into place like it might blow away. "I still hate being without you," I told the granite, "but I'm not broken. Not entirely." The breeze picked up, lifting the edge of my scarf. I didn't grab for it, just let it flap, soft and weightless. I stood there for a while. No words came after that, but none were needed. As I turned to leave, something fell out of my coat pocket. Pip's toy mouse chewed and limp from her constant tugging. It bounced once on the grass and rolled to a stop just beside the grave. I bent down to pick it up, but paused, my hand hovering. Instead, I sat cross-legged in the grass for a while, the toy between us like an offering. The wind was gentle now. The air didn't feel heavy. When I finally got up, I left the mouse there. Not for Hank. For me. By the time I got home, Pip was sitting on the porch, rail tail twitching, as if she'd been waiting all along. I hadn't set the table in months. Not really. But this morning, I laid out placemats, wiped down the salt shaker, and made sure the forks all faced the same way. The plates even matched white with a faint blue edge from a set Hank and I got in some department store sale decades ago. Ivy arrived just before noon, her mother in tow. They carried a warm casserole and a bouquet of flowers wrapped in paper. Pip greeted them like she owned the place, winding through their ankles tail high. "Wow," Ivy's mother said, glancing around. "It looks lovely in here." I shrugged it off and waved them in. We ate at the table. Real chairs, not the couch. Ivy sat beside me, close enough to share her cornbread. Pip stationed herself near the breadbasket alert like some feline sentinel guarding the carb supply. Midway through lunch, Ivy looked up at me with her usual bright eyes and said, "Grandma, this house doesn't feel sad anymore." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled and offered her more lemonade. After they left, I stood in the kitchen holding the flowers they brought. Yellow and white, the kind I usually found too sharp-smelling. But they were fresh, alive, from someone who thought of me. I moved the vase from the counter to the windowsill, then to the small table in the hall. Nothing looked quite right, but I didn't stop trying. I ended up walking the flowers through 3 rooms before they found their place in the corner of the dining room, next to the framed photo of Hank in his uniform. The next day, I bought more. Not for anyone else, just because the first vase no longer looked out of place. That afternoon, Pip leapt onto the sideboard and knocked the yellow ones straight over. Water spread across the wood like it had been waiting to escape. I didn't yell. I laughed just once and grabbed a towel. By evening, a new vase stood in its place, and Pip lay curled beneath the table, content as ever. I woke early, before the sun was more than a silver edge along the window frame. I lay there for a while, listening to Pip snore. Yes, she snores, curled tight against my ribs like a heat pack with whiskers. And then, without thinking, I got up and opened every window in the house. One by one, I lifted the panes. Some stuck, some groaned, but I opened them all. The air rushed in cold, a little wild but clean. It smelled like grass and sky and something else I hadn't let in for month space. I stripped the bedsheets and threw them into the washer with a splash of lemon soap. Not because anyone was visiting, not because it was a chore I had to do, just because I wanted to sleep in something that didn't carry so much weight. The curtains came down next. I hadn't touched them since Hank died. Dust billowed off them like gray memory, but I didn't flinch. I tied my hair back, filled the sink, and scrubbed them clean. The water turned murky fast, then clearer with every rinse. By late morning, the house looked unfamiliar. In the best way, sunlight pouring in curtains drying on the line. The scent of lemon trailing through the hallway, like a quiet apology. Outside, Pip darted across the lawn, chasing a leaf or a shadow, or her own thoughts. I watched her from the porch, the mug of tea warm between my hands. The steam rose steady. My breath did too. I thought of Hank. I always do. But today, the thought didn't pull me under. It came like a tide, gentle familiar rolling in and then out again without knocking me off my feet. I sat there a long time listening to the wind move through the trees, watching Pip lose herself in whatever small joy she'd found in the grass. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to end. I just felt still enough to hear the doorbell when it rang again. I marked the day on the calendar this time. Not with dread, just with a soft circle in pencil, like a nod to something that still mattered. 1 year since Hank was gone. I didn't stay in bed. I didn't close the curtains. Instead, I put on my coat and real shoes, the kind with laces, and walked to the corner bakery. There were 2 women in line ahead of me, chatting about nothing at all. I waited quietly. breathing in the scent of sugar and yeast and cinnamon. When it was my turn, I bought one pastry. Hank's favorite, the kind with custard in the center and a little powdered sugar on top. The woman behind the counter asked if I wanted it boxed. I said no. I drove to the cemetery parked beneath the same tree I had last spring. The grass was dry, now pale around the edges, but not brittle. I sat down beside Hank's headstone and unwrapped the pastry, placing half on a napkin in front of the stone. I know you're not really hungry, I murmured, but it didn't feel right not bringing anything. The wind rustled the nearby branches. I sat there a while talking like I used to when he was napping on the porch, softly, knowing he might not answer but still wanting him to hear. By the time I got home, Pip was waiting on the front mat, tail flicking. She stretched when she saw me, then trotted inside like she hadn't missed me at all. That evening, I lit a candle on the kitchen counter. Not because it was a vigil, just because it was getting dark and I didn't feel like turning on the overhead light. Pip chased a floating bit of dust through the last rays of sun, her paws soft against the tile. I watched her, one hand wrapped around my mug, and smiled. Not because the grief was gone, but because something stayed. And somehow, that was enough.